Fake roofers came to an elderly widow's home in the middle of a harsh winter and demanded $10,000 for a roof repair she never agreed to. When Mary refused to sign, their polite voices turned cold, and the men began threatening to have her removed from the only home she had left. Her old dog, Max, stepped between them and his trembling owner, ready to protect her, even with his aging body. Just then, John Mercer, a homeless veteran and former Army combat engineer, passed by and noticed something wrong with the truck, the paperwork, and the roof itself. What looked like a simple roofing scam soon revealed a cruel plan targeting lonely seniors across the town. But one brave widow, one loyal dog, and one wounded veteran refused to let fear win that night. Where are you watching from today? Please like, share, and subscribe to Vet and Paw Stories for more heartfelt stories like this. By the last week of January, Milford Hollow, Pennsylvania, had become the kind of town that seemed to hold its breath beneath winter. Snow had fallen for 3 straight days, not in a violent rush, but in a patient, smothering silence, covering the pine ridges, the split-rail fences, the empty fields, and the narrow country roads that bent between old houses like forgotten footpaths. Roof lines sagged under white weight. Mailboxes stood half-buried along the shoulders. The bare trees lifted their black branches into the pale sky as if asking how much more the season intended to take. At the far edge of town, where Old Briar Road thinned into a lane of wind-polished snow, Mary Whitaker lived in a house most people drove past without truly seeing. It was a 2-story wooden home with faded blue shutters, a stone chimney, and a back roof that had begun to show its age after too many winters. The porch boards complained when the wind changed. The gutter along the rear corner hung slightly lower than it should. A few shingles near the dormer had darkened from old damp. To anyone else, it might have looked like a property losing value. To Mary, it was the last place on earth where her life still answered back. She was 76 years old, small in frame, with white hair pinned loosely behind her head and hands that had grown thin but still moved with the memory of music. Before her husband Thomas died, she had taught piano lessons in the front room, the same room where Thomas used to sit in the evenings with a newspaper folded on one knee and a cup of coffee cooling beside him. He had rebuilt the kitchen cabinets himself, replaced the stair railing after Mary slipped one winter, and patched the roof more than once while she stood below pretending not to worry. Even now, years after his passing, she could still hear the rhythm of his hammer in the walls when the house settled at night. That morning, Mary stood at the kitchen window and watched snow slide from the lower branches of the maple tree Thomas had planted when they were young. On the floor beside her lay Max, her old German Shepherd and Labrador mix, his black and tan coat faded with age, his muzzle silver, one ear still proud and upright, while the other folded slightly at the tip from an old injury. His right hind leg stiffened whenever the cold pressed too deeply into the house, but he followed Mary from room to room as if age were only an inconvenience, not a command. "Don't look at me like that," Mary murmured, turning from the window. "I know the roof is making noise." Max lifted his head. His amber-brown eyes followed her hand as she reached for the kettle. Since Thomas died, Max had become more than a dog. He was the sound that answered when the rooms grew too quiet. He was the body at her feet when she sat alone after supper. He was the warning bark when she forgot a burner, the steady presence at the bedroom door when the wind made the rafters creak. Some nights, when the old roof groaned under snow, Mary would wake with her heart racing, only to find Max standing between her bed and the dark hallway, as if one aging dog could keep the whole winter back by refusing to move. She had called around that morning about the roof, not because she trusted strangers, and not because she had money to spare, but because the sound above the back room had changed. It no longer creaked like old wood, it clicked and shifted, a small dry sound that reminded her of bones. Ruth from Mabel's Diner had said she might ask around. Pastor Crane from the little church had not answered. Mary told herself she could wait one more day, maybe 2. Thomas had always said a house gave warnings before it gave way. She wished he were there to hear this one. Across town, John Mercer drove a rusted dark pickup through the snow with one hand on the wheel and the other wrapped around a paper cup of black coffee gone lukewarm. He was 49, though winter and war had carved him closer to 50 in the face. His jaw was hard and defined, his skin weathered by sun, wind, and years of sleeping wherever work left him. Short military-cut hair sat flattened beneath a gray knit cap. His blue-gray eyes rarely rested on anything for long. They measured, they checked, they looked for weak joints, bad angles, fresh tracks, loose wires, exits. In the bed of his truck, under a tarp tied down with rope, he carried more than most handymen needed: a metal toolbox, jumper cables, a folded military tarp, spare fuses, rope, a crowbar, a coil of wire, a flashlight with dented casing, and a few pieces of his old life he had never managed to throw away. John had been an Army combat engineer, the kind of man trained to build under pressure, repair under fire, and notice the difference between damage caused by weather and damage caused by hands. He had built temporary bridges in places where no one had time to be grateful. He had reinforced walls that shook with distant explosions. He had learned how to make a structure hold long enough for people to get through. What he had never learned was how to make his own life hold. Since leaving the service, John had drifted from town to town taking repair work that paid in cash, meals, or sometimes nothing more than a full tank of gas. He slept in cheap rooms when he could, in his truck when he had to, and under roofs that never felt like they belonged to him. Homes made him uneasy. Warm windows made him slow down and then hate himself for slowing down. A kitchen light at dusk could hurt worse than cold. That day he was headed toward Milford Hollow Community Church to fix a generator before the next storm rolled in. He had stopped at Mabel's Diner because the sign still said hot coffee, even though the parking lot had not been plowed properly. Inside, the diner smelled of bacon grease, wet wool, and burnt toast. 3 locals sat at the counter, talking in low voices about the weather, and a roofing crew that had been moving through the outskirts after the snow. They came to Mrs. Doyle's place yesterday, one man said. Told her the whole roof was about to come down. Same outfit called on Eleanor Briggs, another muttered. 10 grand for emergency work. 10 grand. In January. Behind the counter, Ruth, a broad-shouldered waitress with gray hair tucked into a net and tired kindness in her eyes, poured John's coffee and lowered her voice. Mary Whitaker called earlier asking if I knew a decent roofman. She sounded scared, poor thing. She's out on Old Briar. No family close by, just that old dog. John listened without turning it into a conversation. He had trained himself not to step into every trouble that crossed his path. Trouble had a way of becoming a room, then a chair, then a name someone used when they expected you to stay. He paid for the coffee, nodded once, and told himself the church generator came first, but the words stayed with him longer than he wanted them to. Old Briar Road lay on the way if he took the slower route around the ridge. John told himself he chose it because the main road was slick, because the wind was worse near the open fields, because a man with a truck full of tools had a right to take any road he pleased. He did not tell himself he was checking on anyone. The Whitaker house appeared beyond a line of bare lilacs, pale and tired beneath its load of snow. John noticed the truck first, white, boxy, backed too close to the porch steps blocking the drive. A magnetic sign on the side read Hawthorne Roofing and Winter Repair, but the lettering sat crooked, and one corner of the sign curled away from the door. The rear plate was smeared with mud thick enough to hide half the numbers. 3 men were there, 2 in work jackets near the ladder, and one on the porch with Mary. John's foot eased off the gas. The ladder bothered him immediately. It leaned at the wrong pitch. Its feet punched shallow into loose snow without pads or a board beneath them. No careful roofer would set it that way in January. No careful roofer would leave tools scattered where an elderly homeowner could trip. No careful roofer would stand that close to a woman holding paperwork with shaking hands. He rolled past the mailbox slowly. The man on the porch was large, red-faced from cold or anger, with a yellow-brown work coat stretched across heavy shoulders and a tool belt hanging low at his hip. Ray Voss had the look of a man who used size before skill and volume before truth. His voice carried across the yard, smooth at first, almost practiced. "Mrs. Whitaker, I'm trying to help you. Once the county marks a structure unsafe, it's out of your hands." Mary stood with her back near the porch rail, the papers pressed to her chest. "I only said I'd like to call someone from church first." Ray's expression hardened. "Mom, by the time church people get involved, your insurance may already be void. You understand what that means? If this roof gives way tonight, they can say you ignored professional warning. Then you're not just looking at repairs. You're looking at removal. Removal? Mary whispered. Temporary relocation, Ray said, as if softening the words made them kinder. For your own safety. Elderly homeowners don't always realize when a house has passed the point of being livable. Max had been standing behind Mary until then, trembling slightly from age and cold. At Ray's last words, the old dog moved forward. Not fast, not like a young animal, but with a steadiness that made John's hand tighten around the steering wheel. Max placed himself between Mary and Ray, head low, silver muzzle wrinkling as a growl rose from his chest. Ray looked down. Get that mutt away from me. Mary reached for Max's collar. Max, no, it's all right, but it was not all right. Ray stepped forward, using one boot to shove at the dog's shoulder. Max stumbled, caught himself, and then snapped, not at flesh, not with wildness, but at the heavy fabric of Ray's pant leg. His teeth clamped around the cloth and held. Ray's face changed, the polished contractor mask vanished, and something ugly came through cleanly. You old. He jerked his leg back, reached to his belt, and pulled the hammer free. John stopped the truck in the road. For 1 second he did not move. He saw the porch, the shaking woman. The old dog holding his ground with a body that had already given more years than it owed. He saw the hammer rise, and with it came another image he had spent years burying. Dust, smoke, a dog's collar in his hand. The impossible silence after a blast. The past did not return gently, it struck. John opened the truck door. He did not run, because running could turn men stupid. He stepped out into the snow, tall and broad-shouldered in his worn olive canvas jacket, old boots crunching over the road's icy crust. The wind cut across his face, but his eyes stayed on Ray's wrist, the hammer, the distance to Mary, the two men by the ladder, the angle of the porch steps. Every part of him that had once survived by noticing details came awake. Hey, one of the workers called. This is private property. John kept walking. Ray turned with the hammer still in his hand. You lost? John reached the gate and pushed it open. Snow fell from the latch. Max remained in front of Mary, panting now, but still standing. Mary's face had gone pale beneath the soft wrinkles of age, one hand frozen in the air as if she could stop what was coming by pleading with it. John's voice came out low, steady, and hard enough to cut through the wind. Put the hammer down. Ray stared at him. Mind your business. John took one more step into the yard. The old soldier in him had spent years avoiding rooms where people might need him. He had driven past lit windows, past broken fences, past strangers, whose troubles were none of his. But the sight of that old dog standing between a frightened woman and a raised hammer had closed whatever distance he had tried to keep from the world. Right now, John said. The yard went still except for the hiss of snow against the dead grass. Max stood in front of Mary. Ray Voss turned fully toward the stranger who had walked in from the road, and John Mercer, who had spent years refusing to belong anywhere, understood with old certainty that this time he was not getting back in his truck and driving away. John Mercer crossed the yard without raising his voice again. Snow hissed around his boots. The porch boards groaned under Ray Voss's weight, and the hammer in Ray's hand hung in the air a second longer than it should have, as if the man holding it had not yet decided whether pride was worth the trouble standing in front of him. John had seen that look before in worse places than a winter porch in Pennsylvania. Men who wanted witnesses to believe they were still in control often waited one breath too long. That breath told the truth. Ray tightened his grip. Max growled, old chest rumbling, body stiff between Mary and the hammer. Mary's face had gone pale, her fingers clutching the papers as though a stack of contract forms could shield her from what was about to happen. John moved then, not fast enough to look reckless, only fast enough to end the question before anyone else answered it wrong. His left hand caught Ray's wrist just below the hammer. His right hand turned the elbow inward, a short, practiced rotation that used Ray's size against him. Ray gasped, shoulder folding, knees hitting the porch with a dull thud that sent powdery snow from the boards. The hammer dropped and bounced once beside Max's paws. One of the other men cursed and stepped off the packed path near the ladder. John did not look frightened. He did not even look hurried. He kept Ray's wrist locked at an angle that made argument painful and turned his head just enough to see both workers. "Before you take another step," he said, Remember, I've got your truck, your faces, the mud over your plate, the unsafe ladder setup, and a homeowner witness. You want this to become assault by a crew. Keep walking." The man stopped. The third worker, younger and thinner, lifted both hands a few inches, not out of innocence but calculation. Ray breathed through his teeth. His red face pressed toward the porch rail. "You're breaking my arm." "No," John said. "I'm stopping you from making a worse decision." He released him with a shove just strong enough to put distance between Ray and the old dog. Ray stumbled upright, rolling his shoulder and trying to rebuild his authority in front of his men. The first thing he did was not check the hammer. It was check Mary. John noticed that. Ray wanted to know if fear had returned to her face. It had, but not in the same shape. Mary was still shaking, still back near the railing, yet her eyes were now moving between the stranger in the olive canvas jacket and the contractor who had been about to strike her dog. Max stayed in front of her, panting through his silvered muzzle, his teeth no longer on Ray's pant leg, but his posture clear enough. Ray wiped snow from one knee. "You have no legal right to interfere with a county-advised emergency roof inspection." John looked at him, then at the crooked magnetic sign on the truck, then at the ladder feet sunk crookedly into loose snow. "County-advised," he repeated. The words did not sound like a question. They sounded like a nail being tapped to see if it was hollow. Ray snatched the papers from the air as though he owned them, but Mary pulled them back against her chest before he could. That small movement surprised everyone, Mary included. John turned toward her slowly, careful not to crowd her. Max's growl deepened again. John took half a step back and opened his hands where she could see them. "Mom," he said, softer now, "I'm not here to take anything from you. I used to work structural and field repair in the Army. Combat engineer. If they're telling you this house is unsafe, I can at least tell you whether the papers look real and whether the damage matches what they're claiming." Mary looked down at the forms, then at Ray, whose jaw tightened. Her voice came out thin. "I don't know you." "No, Mom," John said. "You don't." That honest answer seemed to matter more than any reassurance would have. He did not add a speech about trust. He did not tell her he was a good man. He only stood in the snow and waited. At last, Mary extended the packet with both hands. John accepted it by the corner, as if touching more of it than necessary would be another kind of intrusion. The top page was an emergency repair agreement with bold red warnings, a large deposit amount circled twice, and a paragraph about insurance liability written in language meant less to inform than to frighten. John read quickly, eyes narrowing. The business license number had too many digits. The county seal was blurred at the edges, like it had been copied from a website and printed on a cheap office machine. The inspector's name was misspelled in one place and abbreviated in another. A phrase near the bottom, emergency condemnation risk, was the kind of official-sounding nonsense people used when they wanted fear to do the work of law. He turned a page. The cancellation penalty was buried in a block of dense wording that would confuse anyone, let alone a frightened widow being pressured on her own porch during a storm warning. Ray folded his arms. "You done pretending to be a lawyer?" John did not answer him. He looked past the porch to the rear slope of the roof. A few shingles near the edge were lifted in a pattern that bothered him. Weather tore irregularly. Wind worried loose materials from the weakest point outward. These marks had a rhythm to them, shallow, deliberate, almost neat. He stepped off the porch and moved along the side path, boots sinking to the ankle. Mary watched from above, one hand now resting on Max's collar. John stopped beneath the gutter. The metal was bent downward at one corner, not crushed by ice but pulled. A thin line in the underlayment near the exposed edge caught the gray light. Fresh, too clean, too straight. He came back to the porch with the papers in hand. Why does a roofing company have a county condemnation notice when there's no independent inspector present? Ray's eyes hardened. "We coordinate with local offices all the time." "Name of the inspector?" "It's on the paperwork. The paperwork spells his name two different ways." One of Ray's men looked toward the truck. John continued, still calm. "Where's your proof of liability insurance? Who's your engineer of record? Why is your ladder set without a baseboard and snowpack? Why is the gutter pulled down at the seam instead of stressed at the bracket? And why are the lifted shingles showing pry marks from the outer edge?" The questions landed one after another. Not loud, not theatrical, but each one taking away a little more of the costume Ray had worn onto that porch. Ray's mouth tightened around a smile that no longer reached his eyes. You some kind of building cop? No. Then you're a drifter with a truck, sticking your nose into a private repair agreement. He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to make it personal. I know your type. You roll into town, sleep behind the wheel, fix a fence for cash, and suddenly you're the man of the hour. For a moment, something moved in John's face. Not anger, exactly. Recognition. The insult had shape because it was close enough to truth to cut. He had slept behind the wheel. He had taken cash jobs. He had parked outside towns he did not belong to and left before anyone learned the reasons. But Ray had misjudged the wound. John did not flinch because he was ashamed of being called homeless. He flinched because Mary's shoulders folded when Ray said it, as if the word had reminded her that the only person standing with her might be someone the world had already decided not to believe. John handed the papers back to Mary. Do not sign this today. Ray laughed once, harsh and flat. That roof goes under tonight. Don't say we didn't warn her. Mary whispered, Is it really that bad? John looked at the roof again. He would not lie to her. Part of it needs work. Soon. But not like this, and not under pressure from men who won't answer basic questions. Mary's eyes filled, not with relief, but with humiliation. She looked at the porch boards, the old rail Thomas had once sanded smooth, the house that had held 40 years of marriage, and now seemed to be discussed as though it were a failing body she had neglected. I didn't know, she said. I thought maybe I had let it go too long. John's voice softened. Old houses need care. That doesn't give anyone the right to scare you out of one. Ray had heard enough. He bent to pick up his hammer, but John's boot came down beside it before his fingers reached the handle. Not on the hammer. Beside it. A warning, not a challenge. The two men looked at each other. Ray straightened slowly. Pack it up, he snapped to his crew. The younger worker moved first, gathering tools too quickly, dropping a pry bar into a bucket with a guilty clang. The other folded the ladder without meeting John's eyes. Ray lingered at the porch steps, his face rearranging itself into something almost polite for Mary's sake. Mrs. Whitaker, he said, I'll file the note that you refused recommended emergency repair. Mary's fingers tightened around Max's collar. Ray leaned a little closer. And about the dog. Once an animal bites a worker, county control can get involved. At your age, you might not want that kind of trouble. Mary's breath caught. Max did not understand county control or paperwork or threats dressed as concern, but he understood Ray's tone. The old dog's lips lifted again. John heard it too. Something cold moved through him, colder than the wind under his jacket. Get in your truck, he said. Ray's eyes flicked to him, then away. A man like Ray knew when a room, or a yard, had stopped belonging to him. He turned, spat into the snow, and walked to the white truck. The engine coughed twice before starting. Muddy tires spun, caught, and dragged the vehicle backward down the drive. The crooked Hawthorne sign shuddered on the door as the truck pulled onto Old Briar Road and disappeared into the white distance. Only after the sound faded did Mary's knees begin to give. John stepped forward by instinct, but she pulled away, frightened by the speed of his movement. He stopped immediately. Sorry, he said. She gripped the porch rail, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. I'm sorry. I don't mean. You don't have to explain. Max pressed his body against her leg, and she lowered one hand to his head. John looked toward the roof. That rear section worries me. I can check from outside. I won't come in unless you ask. If there's a weak spot, I can brace it enough to get you through the night. Mary studied him for a long moment. The snow gathered on his shoulders. His truck sat in the road with its door not quite closed, tools visible beneath the tarp. He looked tired, not dangerous, and that somehow made trusting him both easier and sadder. There's an old ladder in the shed, she said. Thomas's ladder. John nodded. I'll be careful with it. The ladder was wooden, heavier than modern aluminum, and worn smooth where Thomas's hands had held it over the years. John tested every rung before putting his weight on it. Max stood in the yard below, never fully relaxed, watching him climb. Mary remained on the porch with her coat pulled tight around her small frame. On the roof, the cold struck harder. John cleared snow with gloved hands and found the lifted shingles near the back room. Under them, the damage told its story plainly. Someone had sliced into the underlayment with a sharp blade. Not deep enough to shout sabotage to an untrained eye, but enough to guide meltwater beneath the surface. Near the edge of a small support member, he found a shallow cut in the wood, clean and recent, made where snow load would increase stress over time. The beam had not failed yet. That was the cruelty of it. It had been made to fail later, when the men who caused it could return and say they had warned her. John looked down. Mrs. Whitaker. Mary stepped off the porch into the yard. What is it? Don't sleep in the back room tonight. Her face changed. That's my room. Move what you need to the front of the house. If the snow gets heavier, this section could crack. She pressed a hand to her mouth. They told me it would be safe until morning if I signed. John did not answer quickly. The truth had edges. They made sure it might not be safe if you didn't. For the next hour, the yard became quiet except for the measured work of John's hands. He took a folded military tarp from his truck, old boards from the shed, a coil of rope, and a tin of heavy nails. He did not try to fix the roof properly. The weather was too cold, the light too poor, and any real repair would require materials and time. Instead, he made it whole. He covered the exposed section, anchored the tarp under existing seams, braced the vulnerable area from the exterior, and redirected the gutter enough to keep meltwater from pouring into the cut. Every movement was economical. Every knot had purpose. Mary watched as if seeing someone speak a language Thomas once knew. When John climbed down, dusk had thickened over the fields. Snow had begun again, tapping softly at first, then with more insistence. Mary disappeared inside and returned with a mug of coffee. She did not invite him in. She set it on the top porch step and retreated a pace. It's not much, she said. John removed one glove and picked up the mug with both hands. It's plenty. Max came forward slowly, nose working. John held still. The old dog sniffed his knuckles, the cuff of his jacket, the cold metal of his watch. Then Max stepped back to Mary's side, not trusting completely, but no longer refusing the possibility. John finished the coffee standing in the yard. He needed to get to the church generator before full dark. He needed to leave before the warmth from Mary's kitchen window began to feel like an invitation. He loaded his tools, coiled the rope, and looked once more at the braced roof. It would hold for the night. Probably. That was all winter allowed sometimes. Not certainty, only enough. He had just closed the toolbox when Max turned away from Mary and walked toward the fence. The dog's movement was slow, but his focus sharpened the yard. He lowered his head near a clump of dead lilacs where snow had drifted against the rails and pawed once at the ground. Mary frowned. Max? The dog pawed again, then looked back at John. Not barking, not begging, showing. John set the toolbox down and crossed the yard. Under the thin layer of new snow, half hidden beside the fence post, lay a small black leather notebook. John crouched and picked it up. It was damp along the edges, still marked with a smear of dirty snow where it must have fallen during the scuffle. No name showed on the cover, no company logo. Just worn black leather, held shut by an elastic band. He looked toward the road where the Hawthorne truck had vanished, then back at Mary and Max. The old dog stood beside her in the falling snow, silver muzzle lifted, as if he already understood that the danger had not left with the truck. John slid the notebook into his jacket pocket. The roof above them knocked softly in the wind, newly braced but not healed. The storm was coming down harder now, and somewhere beyond the white bend of Old Briar Road, Ray Voss had driven away without realizing he had dropped the first loose thread of something much larger than a crooked repair contract. John did not open the notebook in the yard. The wind had sharpened, and the snow was coming down in finer, harder grains now, tapping against his jacket and the brim of his cap like thrown sand. Mary stood near the porch with one hand on Max's collar, watching the small black thing in John's gloved hand as if it might hiss. A few minutes earlier, the worst danger had seemed to be a crooked contractor and a roof that had been tampered with. Now the yard felt different. The Hawthorne truck was gone, the road was empty, and yet something about the notebook made the silence feel occupied. John slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket and looked toward the roof he had braced. "We should get out of the weather," he said. Mary's first reaction was not agreement but fear. Her eyes moved to the front door, then to John, then to Max. She had spent years learning how to live alone carefully, when to open the door, when not to, which voices to trust through a chain lock, how to smile politely without inviting people too far inside. John saw all of that hesitation in her face and did not step toward the house. "Kitchen table," he said. "Front room. Door open if you want it. I won't go farther than you say." Mary looked at Max. The old dog stared at John for a long moment, then gave a low breath through his nose and turned toward the door. It was not permission exactly, but it was enough for Mary to whisper, "All right, just the kitchen." The inside of the house held the kind of warmth that did not come from heat alone. It smelled faintly of old wood, tea leaves, dusted books, and the wool blanket folded over the back of Mary's chair. The kitchen cabinets were painted cream, worn at the handles where hands had touched them for decades. A small framed photograph of Thomas Whitaker in a plaid shirt sat on a shelf near the stove, his smile steady and unguarded, the smile of a man who had not known yet how much he would be missed. John noticed the photo and looked away quickly. Some rooms held love so plainly that stepping into them felt like trespassing. Mary placed Max's water bowl closer to the stove, then stood beside the table without sitting, as if sitting would make all of this real. John took the notebook out, brushed away damp snow from the leather cover, and set it on a dish towel so it would not wet the wood. "I don't know what this is," he said before opening it, "and I don't want to guess." Mary nodded, but her hands had already found the edge of her cardigan and were twisting it. Inside, the notebook was not what John expected. It was not a confession, it was not a clean list of crimes. It looked, at first glance, like a contractor's field log. Dates, roads, abbreviated names, numbers circled, short notes written in blocky handwriting. That made it more disturbing, not less. Evil written neatly in ordinary work shorthand always did. John turned the pages slowly, careful not to smear the damp ink near the edges. Some entries had addresses shortened into initials and numbers. Others had dollar amounts beside them. 7K, 10K, 12.5 possible. There were notes about roof age, window rot, chimney condition. Then came other notes that had nothing to do with repair work. No son nearby, daughter in Ohio, church Wednesdays, lights out by 9, heart meds, dog present, uses cane, sleeps rear bedroom. Mary's lips parted, but no sound came out. John stopped on a page marked Old Briar WHTKR. Mary's last name had not even been written fully, as if reducing her to letters made her easier to handle. A red circle surrounded a line near the center of the page. Widow. Dog protective. Roof pressure first. Insurance scare. Push before next storm. The kitchen seemed to lose a degree of warmth. Mary reached for her glasses, tried to settle them on her nose, and failed because her fingers were shaking too badly. John turned the notebook toward her without pushing it closer. She read the line once, then again, and something in her face changed more deeply than panic. It was recognition, not of Ray, not of the company, but of the last few weeks of her own life rearranging themselves into something cruel. The late-night creaks above the back room, the strange flyer in the mailbox, the call about winter safety assessments, the man who had parked across the road 2 mornings earlier and driven off when Max barked from the window. They knew about him, she whispered, looking down at Max. The old dog had lowered himself beside her chair, his head up, sensing her distress before understanding any cause. They wrote down that he protects me. Her voice thinned, like it was a problem to solve. John had no answer that would not insult the truth. He turned another page. Several entries had markings he did not like. B-check, W-notice, county, AP, Renshaw, Spring Close. Some were circled, some had question marks. He had seen enough field notes in his life to understand how people wrote when they were not writing for outsiders. This was not the full operation. It was one man's working memory. Appointments, pressure points, reminders, maybe leverage, maybe targets, but not enough to prove every suspicion that mattered. John took out his phone and began photographing each page, starting with the cover, then the inside front, then the entries in order. "What are you doing?" Mary asked. "Preserving it," he said. "If this goes missing, the pictures stay. If the pictures get challenged, the original stays." He angled the phone so the timestamp would show on the lock screen before taking another shot. "I'm not calling the local police yet." Mary stiffened. "Why not?" "Because I don't know who those initials belong to." He tapped the page with county, written near the margin. "And because if someone inside an office has been feeding these men information, Handing this over blindly could bury it before morning. Mary sank into the chair then, not with drama, but because her legs seemed to have quietly resigned. This can't be real. She looked around the kitchen, the clean counter, the kettle, Thomas's photo, Max's bowl. I'm nobody. I don't have anything worth all this. John looked at the old cabinets, the careful curtains, the property beyond the darkening windows. You have a house, you have land, you live alone, to the right kind of man, that's enough. The words sounded harsh, but he did not soften them. Mary deserved danger in its true shape, not wrapped in comfort. Her eyes filled, though the tears did not fall. It isn't the money, she said. It's that someone looked at my life and only saw where it was weak. That line stayed in the room. Mary reached for the notebook again, turning pages with the tips of her fingers until she stopped suddenly. Eleanor, she breathed. John leaned closer. The entry was marked E. Briggs, North Hill, Chimney. Beside it were notes: heart condition, power loss risk, no close family, ask about transfer. Mary's face tightened. Eleanor Briggs. She sang alto next to me in church for 30 years. She has a heart device. Her house loses power every time the wind comes from the ridge. She stood too quickly, chair scraping. I have to call her. She went to the wall phone near the pantry and lifted the receiver. Static answered. She pressed the cradle, tried again, then turned the little dial on the base as if determination could fix the line. Nothing but crackle. My cell phone won't hold a signal in the kitchen, she said, hurrying toward a drawer, and it barely charges. John picked up his own phone. One bar blinked, vanished, returned. Who do you trust outside town? He asked. Mary looked at him blankly. Outside town? Someone who won't call Ray before they call you back. There was only one person John could think of, and calling him felt like opening a door he usually kept locked. He scrolled past numbers he never used and stopped on Mason Greer. For a moment, his thumb hovered over the name. Mason had served with him years ago, not in the same exact silence, but close enough to know its language. These days, Mason worked for the state, investigating fraud against elderly homeowners, veterans, and families too tired or too frightened to fight paperwork. John had not spoken to him in months. Friendship required maintenance. John was better at engines. Still, he pressed call. Mason answered on the fourth ring, voice low and alert beneath the faint hum of a road or office heater. Mercer? John did not waste time. I'm in Milford Hollow. Found something at a residence. Possible contractor fraud, elder targeting, maybe county involvement. A pause. Then Mason's tone changed, not alarmed, focused. Start clean. Who's the homeowner? John looked at Mary. Mary Whitaker, 76, widow. Roofing crew pressured her for 10 grand, threatened insurance and relocation. Dog intervened. Crew lead dropped a notebook. Mason exhaled slowly. Tell me, you didn't rough him up too badly. Stop a hammer. That isn't an answer. It's the one you get. Another pause, and despite everything, there was a tired familiarity in it. All right, photograph every page. Do not write in it. Do not tear anything out. Do not hand it to anyone local until I know more. Get pictures of the roof damage if you can do it safely. Get the company name, truck description, any plate numbers. Already have part of it. Of course you do. John put the phone on speaker so Mary could hear. Mason's voice softened when he addressed her. Mrs. Whitaker, my name is Mason Greer. I work with state investigations. I need you to understand something. That notebook may be important, but by itself it may not be enough. A defense attorney could call it a customer log. We need patterns, other victims, proof of threats, proof of tampering, anything linking this crew to whoever is paying them. Mary gripped the edge of the table. They have my friend's name. Then don't confront them, Mason said. Verify quietly. If your friend is in immediate danger, help her, but do not warn the roofing crew that you're building a case. Mary looked at John, fear returning. A case, she repeated, as if the word belonged to courthouses and television, not her kitchen. After the call ended, the room felt larger and emptier. John wrapped the notebook in a plastic freezer bag Mary gave him, then placed that inside a second bag. He labeled the outside with the date and time, using a marker from a junk drawer. Mary watched the practical care of it, the way he made fear into steps that seemed to steady her more than reassurance. I'm too old for this, she said. No, John replied, not gently but not unkindly. You're too old to be hunted. That's different. Mary almost smiled, but it broke before it formed. I am afraid, she admitted. I'm afraid they'll come back. I'm afraid they'll take Max. I'm afraid if I leave this house, I'll never be allowed to come home." Max rose at the sound of his name and pressed his head against her knee. She rested both hands on his silver muzzle. Then she looked at the open page with Eleanor's name. "But Eleanor has no Max," she said, "and if her heat is out—" She did not finish. She did not need to. John glanced toward the dark window. The road to North Hill would be bad by now. The church generator still needed repair. The smart thing, the thing Mason would prefer, was to secure Mary, wait for daylight, let state channels work. But waiting was a luxury weather did not always grant. "If we go," he said, "we go careful. We don't accuse anyone. We check on your friend. That's all." Mary nodded too quickly, then stopped herself. "I need my medicine, and Max's pills, and Thomas's gloves are in the mudroom if yours are wet." It was the first time she had offered him something from inside the house without placing it at a distance. The gesture was small, almost practical enough to hide behind, but John felt it. He followed only as far as the doorway, waiting until she returned with a pair of old leather work gloves lined with wool. They were worn at the palms, shaped by another man's hands. "Thomas used those when he cleared the gutters," Mary said. "They may be too small." John took them carefully. They were a little tight, but warm. "They'll do." Before leaving, John called Milford Hollow Community Church. The line clicked twice before an elderly man answered with a voice full of gravel and concern. "Pastor Crane." John gave his name and explained that the generator would have to wait. Mary stepped closer and spoke into the phone. "Willard, it's Mary." The pastor's voice changed at once. "Mary, are you all right?" That question nearly undid her, but she held herself together. "I'm with Mr. Mercer. He was coming to fix your generator." Pastor Willard Crane, who had known Mary since her hair still held brown and Thomas still sang badly in the third pew, did not hesitate. "John Mercer is the man we hired. If he says something's wrong, listen to him. I'll keep trying Eleanor's line from here." Mary closed her eyes in relief. Trust, for her, did not arrive all at once. It came with familiar voices confirming that the stranger at her table had not appeared from nowhere. John placed the wrapped notebook inside a small metal box from his truck, the kind he used for spare fuses and old service papers, then wedged it beneath the passenger seat where it would not slide. Mary locked the front door twice. Max waited at the truck, stiff-legged but determined, and John lifted him gently into the back seat before the old dog could hurt himself jumping. Mary climbed into the passenger side, clutching a cloth bag with her medicine, a scarf, and a small flashlight. She looked back once at the house. The tarp over the rear roof snapped in the wind, ugly but holding. The porch light glowed weakly against the snow. John started the engine. For a few seconds, none of them spoke. The heater coughed, then pushed out air that was not yet warm. Max lay across the back seat with his head up, eyes fixed through the windshield. Mary held the strap of her bag in both hands. John eased the truck onto Old Briar Road, following the narrow path his own tires had made earlier. Behind them, falling snow began to erase the tracks almost immediately. Ahead, the road bent toward North Hill, toward Eleanor Briggs, toward the names written in Ray Voss's blunt hand. John drove carefully into the white dark, carrying a frightened widow, an old dog, and a notebook that did not tell the whole truth, but told enough to make leaving impossible. The road to North Hill climbed out of Milford Hollow like a pale ribbon pulled through the dark. John kept the truck slow, not because the engine lacked strength, but because snow had covered the shoulder lines and filled the ditches until the whole world beyond the headlights looked flat enough to betray a careless driver. Mary sat beside him with both hands locked around the strap of her cloth bag. She had said very little since they left her house. Max lay across the back seat, too old to pace, too alert to rest, his amber eyes catching stray light each time the truck passed a mailbox or a black stand of trees. The notebook was wedged beneath the passenger seat inside John's metal box, but Mary kept glancing down as if she could feel it there, pulsing like a second heart. John did not tell her not to be afraid. Fear, in his experience, became more dangerous when people were ashamed of it. Instead, he drove with both hands on the wheel and named what he saw. Drift left, ice under the powder, mailbox coming up, road bends after the birch. It was not conversation. Exactly, it was a way of keeping the dark from feeling empty. Eleanor Briggs's house sat halfway up the north slope, where wind came through the pines hard enough to sculpt the snow into ridges along the porch. The place was narrow and tall, painted a weather-faded yellow that looked almost gray under the storm. One front shutter hung loose. The porch light flickered, dimmed, came back, then dimmed again. Worst of all, the chimney gave almost no smoke. In weather like this, a house with heat should have been breathing. This one barely seemed alive. John parked at an angle that would let him pull out quickly if the road iced worse. Mary was out of the truck before he could come around to help her, moving with a frightened urgency that made her look both older and stronger than she had at her own kitchen table. "Eleanor," she called, gripping the porch rail. "Eleanor, it's Mary." For several seconds there was only wind. Then, from inside, a thin voice answered, not loud enough to be words at first. John tested the door with the back of his knuckles. It was not latched properly. It opened inward with a tired scrape. The cold inside the entryway was wrong. Not outdoor cold, but the creeping kind that had been allowed to settle. Eleanor Briggs sat in the kitchen wrapped in 3 layers of sweaters and a camel-colored coat, her long, fine-boned face pale beneath neatly pinned silver-blonde hair. Even shivering, she held herself with the remnants of old church choir dignity, chin slightly lifted, hands folded around a mug that had stopped steaming long ago. "Mary," she breathed, trying to rise. Mary reached her first and put both hands on her shoulders. "Don't stand. Don't you dare stand." Eleanor looked past Mary to John, then to Max, who had limped in behind them and lowered himself near the kitchen doorway as if he understood this was a room for quiet. "I didn't know who else to call," Eleanor said. The phone kept cutting in and out. John was already looking around, not rifling, not invading, just reading the space, the thermostat set high, the old furnace access door in the narrow utility alcove, the faint smell of unburned fuel, the clean floor near the wall as if someone had knelt there recently. "Mrs. Briggs," he said, keeping his voice even, "did a roofing crew come here today?" She closed her eyes. 2 men. Not the same big one Mary described. They said the chimney was cracked, said the heating system might be unsafe if the draft was wrong. They said they could arrange a temporary transfer form so I wouldn't be alone if the county had to inspect. Her embarrassment showed in the way she looked down at her mug. I almost signed. But I wanted to ask Mary. Then, after they left, the heat went out. John found the furnace panel and removed it with the small screwdriver he kept in his coat. He did not need long. The igniter lead had been loosened and tucked back just enough to break contact while still looking like age or vibration had done it. A dishonest repairman's trick, subtle enough to pass as failure and easy enough to reverse if paid. He reconnected it, checked the line, then signaled for Mary to keep Eleanor away from the unit while he restarted the system. The furnace coughed once, then came alive with a low rush. Warm air did not fill the room immediately, but the sound changed everything. Eleanor covered her mouth with one trembling hand. So it wasn't broken? John replaced the panel. It was made to look broken. Mary turned toward the window, and for a moment her face held no tears, only a kind of stunned grief. "They don't even have to break down the door," she said quietly. "They just take away the heat and wait for fear to do the rest." That sentence followed them back into the truck after Eleanor had been settled with blankets, a working phone placed within reach, and Pastor Crane called from John's cell to check in through the night. John would have preferred to stop there. One house visited, one danger reduced, enough for a storm-dark evening. But the notebook had another entry close enough to reach before the roads worsened. C roads, Old Station Road, shed load, high pressure. Mary knew the name. Calvin Rhodes, 80, former truck driver, widower, stubborn enough to argue with weather and usually win. "He won't open for you," Mary warned. "Then you talk first," John said. Calvin's house crouched near an abandoned gas station at the edge of town, a low building with a red metal roof and a yard full of half-buried objects that might have been machinery, planters, or memories. A security light snapped on when John's truck rolled in, and the front door opened no farther than the chain allowed. A tall, spare old man with a bristling white mustache and a mechanic's shoulders gone narrow with age glared through the crack, a wrench gripped in his right hand. "If you're roof boys," he barked, "I've got a shotgun older than you and better manners." Mary stepped into the porch light. "Calvin, it's Mary Whitaker. Please don't point anything at Mr. Mercer. He's helping me." Calvin squinted at her, then at John, then down at Max, who had climbed stiffly from the truck and now sat in the snow at the bottom of the steps, head tilted with grave patience. The old man's face changed by a fraction. That Thomas's dog? Mine now, Mary said. Calvin shut the door, removed the chain, and opened it wider. Dog can come in. The rest of you wipe your boots. Calvin did not like the story. That was clear before he even admitted he had one of his own. He stood in his kitchen with the wrench still in hand while John explained nothing more than necessary. Hawthorne, notebook, marked addresses, possible damage. Calvin's mouth tightened at the company name. They were here 2 days ago. Said the shed roof was a liability. Said if it came down under snow and damaged the main line, my insurer would write me off as negligent. Wanted a deposit before they'd stabilize it. He spat the word as if it tasted bad. I drove 18-wheelers through Wyoming blizzards before they were born. Did they go near the shed? John asked. Calvin hesitated, and that hesitation was answer enough. The shed behind the house leaned but had not surrendered. It was an old timber frame with patched siding and a roof heavy with snow. John took a flashlight and Calvin's permission, though not his trust, and checked the interior beams. The cut was exactly where a dishonest man would put it. Not obvious from the doorway, not deep enough to fail immediately, but placed at the lower edge of a brace that would carry extra stress under snow load. Fresh wood showed pale inside the dark timber. John touched it with one gloved finger and felt the anger rise in him, not hot but deep. They didn't just lie to you. Calvin stepped close, saw the cut, and went still. They cut my shed. They set it up to fail. For a second, the old trucker looked less furious than wounded. His house, his shed, his ability to judge what was his. Someone had entered all of it and treated him like an obstacle. Then the fury came back. Give me the name of the big one. John blocked him before he could move toward the door. No. Calvin's eyes flashed. No, if you go after Ray Voss, he calls you unstable. If I go with you, he calls me a violent drifter leading old folks into trouble. That helps him. Calvin's grip tightened on the wrench. Mary, standing just inside the shed door with Max beside her, spoke before John could. Calvin, please. They want us angry. They know what angry looks like on people our age. They turn it into proof. That stopped him in a way John's strength would not have. Calvin lowered the wrench a little, breathing hard. So what, we sit? No, John said. We document. The next arrival came in a wash of blue-white headlights through falling snow. A sheriff's vehicle turned into Calvin's drive and stopped behind John's truck. Deputy Aaron Pike stepped out, pulling his winter jacket close, young enough compared with the people on the porch, but not so young that the job had left him untouched. He had a long face, tired blue eyes, and the careful posture of a man who had learned that small towns remembered every mistake. Mrs. Whitaker, he called. Pastor Crane said you might be in trouble. His gaze moved to John, to Calvin's wrench, to Max, to the open shed. I'm hoping someone can tell me why I've got 3 elderly residents out in a storm and 1 man I don't know standing in a damaged shed. John did not bristle. He gave Aaron the clean version first. Roofing crew, pressure contract, suspected tampering. Then he showed him the photos. Mary's lifted shingles, Eleanor's disconnected igniter, Calvin's cut brace, and finally the notebook entries. Aaron did not become a hero in one breath. At first his face tightened with procedural caution. Most contractor disputes are civil unless there's intentional damage, elder intimidation, forged documents, or coordinated targeting, John said. Aaron looked at him. Calvin muttered, he talks like a manual, but he's right. Aaron studied the cut beam himself, then asked to see the photos again. Something shifted in him when he reached Eleanor's entry. We had reports, he said quietly. Not like this, just bits. People selling after winter damage. Complaints withdrawn. My supervisor said not to turn every bad repair into a criminal case. Who bought the properties? John asked. Aaron did not answer immediately. Wind moved loose snow across the shed threshold. A few went through different brokers, but the development signs all ended up the same. He looked at the notebook page. Renshaw Development Group. Mary remembered the name from a newspaper clipping at the diner. Clive Renshaw smiling beside a model of a future winter resort, promising jobs, visitors, renewal. Aaron's mouth tightened. Renshaw's been buying North Edge parcels for a spring closing. Publicly, he's the man saving Milford Hollow from dying. Privately, he stopped. A deputy had to be careful with words. John understood. Privately, old people were being moved off land that had suddenly become useful. Aaron took his own photos, recorded Calvin's statement on a small device, and promised to send what he could to Mason through state channels rather than through his supervisor first. It was a risk, and he knew it. John respected him more for being afraid and doing it anyway. They secured Calvin's shed enough for the night with a temporary brace, and John made Calvin promise not to confront anyone before morning. Calvin gave the promise only after Max leaned against his leg, which annoyed him enough to agree. "Fine," he grumbled, "but if that big red-faced bastard steps on my porch again, I'm not serving tea." They left Calvin's drive in single file, Aaron's cruiser lingering behind until John's truck reached the main road. Snow had thickened again, swallowing the houses almost as soon as they passed. Mary sat silent, but it was a different silence than before. Not helpless, heavy. John noticed the black SUV after the second bend. It stayed far back, headlights dimmed, too steady to be a neighbor and too patient to be lost. He did not mention it at once. Mary had already endured enough fear for one night. He drove normally until the road dipped near the old quarry turnoff, then killed his headlights for 3 seconds, took the unmarked service lane he had noticed on the way up, and let the truck slide behind a wall of snow-laden pines. The SUV continued along the main road, slow, searching. Mary's hand rose to her throat. "Was that them?" Max growled from the back seat, low and tired. John waited until the SUV's glow vanished. "Someone knows the notebook is gone." Mary closed her eyes. The cab felt small around them, full of engine heat, wet wool, dog breath, and the knowledge that the danger now had wheels and patience. John's phone vibrated before he pulled back onto the road. Mason's name lit the screen. John answered on speaker. Mason did not waste time. "I got your photos and Deputy Pike's preliminary notes. Hawthorne's been named in 3 complaints statewide, none strong enough to charge. Renshaw Development shows up near 2 property transfers after winter damage claims. It's not enough yet, but it's a pattern." John looked through the windshield at the snow erasing their hiding place. "What do you need?" Mason's answer came flat and unwelcome. "We need them to make a move they can't explain away. Threaten a witness, demand the notebook. Trespass, try to destroy evidence. Something active." Mary turned toward John in the weak dashboard light. He already hated the shape of the thought forming between them. "No," he said before she spoke. "I'm not using your house as bait." Mary's hands trembled in her lap. She was still frightened. Nothing in her face pretended otherwise. But when she spoke, her voice held a thread of steel that had not been there at the start of the night. "If we don't stop them at my house," she said, very softly, "they'll come for Eleanor's another night." John looked at her, then at Max in the rearview mirror, then at the road leading back toward Old Briar. The storm pressed around the truck like a closing fist, and for the first time since finding the notebook, John understood that Mary Whitaker was no longer asking to be saved. She was deciding who else would not be left alone. John brought Mary home before dawn, when the sky over Milford Hollow was not yet morning but no longer fully night. The storm had thinned into a hard, slanting snow that scraped along the road and gathered in the tire tracks almost as quickly as the truck made them. Mary did not speak as they turned onto Old Briar. She sat with her scarf pulled close to her throat, one hand resting on the cloth bag in her lap, the other reaching back through the gap between the seats to touch Max's head. The old dog had finally lowered himself onto the rear bench, but he had not slept. Every time the truck slowed, his ears lifted. Every time wind struck the side panel, his eyes opened. The house appeared gradually through the white porch light still burning, tarp on the rear roof snapping and pulling against the ropes John had tied hours earlier. It had held. Not beautifully, not permanently, but it had held. Mary let out a breath so quiet John nearly missed it. "Thomas would have hated seeing it like that," she said. John parked beside the drive rather than blocking it. "He would have hated worse seeing you under that back ceiling tonight." Mary looked at him, and for the first time there was no immediate fear in her eyes when he spoke. Only exhaustion and the heavy understanding that safety had become temporary. Inside, the house felt changed. The same kitchen waited with its cream cabinets, its old kettle, its framed photograph of Thomas. But the notebook had altered the rooms without touching them. Mary no longer moved through her home with the ordinary habits of a widow keeping warm. She looked at the windows. She checked the lock after John had already checked it. She paused at the hallway leading to the rear bedroom and did not go down it. John noticed but did not tell her what to feel. He carried the metal box in from the truck, set it on the kitchen table, and called Mason before removing his coat. Mason answered faster this time, voice rough with fatigue but fully awake. "You back at Mrs. Whitaker's?" "Anyone follow?" "Black SUV tailed us after Calvin's, lost it near the quarry road." "Good. Listen carefully. You do not have to stay there. I can send a unit to move her somewhere safe." John looked at Mary. She had heard. Her fingers tightened around the back of a chair. Mason continued, "But if she leaves, they may return to recover whatever they lost, damage the property further, or claim abandonment. If she stays, they may come back and escalate. I need both of you to understand the choice." John put the phone on the table between them. "She hears you." Mary lowered herself into the chair as if her bones had suddenly grown older. On the table beside the phone was a thick photo album with cracked brown leather corners. She had pulled it from a lower shelf sometime before leaving, maybe without remembering it. Now her palm rested on the cover. Inside were years no notebook could reduce to pressure points. Thomas on a ladder with paint on his cheek. Mary in a summer dress beside the maple tree. Max as a muddy puppy, too big for the cardboard box he had been found in. Mary did not open the album. She only held it there under her hand while Mason explained the risks in plain language. She could leave. She could stay. If she stayed, they would prepare cameras, preserve the notebook, document any call, and avoid confrontation unless someone entered or threatened harm. If she left, Deputy Pike could help secure the house, but Ray might still claim she had abandoned an unsafe residence. None of the choices were clean. That was what made them real. "I don't want to be brave," Mary said at last, not to Mason, not fully to John, but to the table between them. "People say that word like it feels noble. It doesn't. It feels cold." John did not answer. Mason did not either. Mary's eyes moved to Thomas's photograph. "I taught children to keep time with a metronome. I made soup for church suppers. I waited beside a hospital bed for 6 months and still thanked every nurse who came in. That is the size of my life. I don't know how to fight men who make lists of widows." Her voice trembled, but she did not stop. "But I know what happens when old people are quiet because they don't want to bother anyone. We disappear politely." She lifted her hand from the album and looked at John. "I will stay, but I want to know every step. I will not be placed in my own house like bait without understanding why." John respected her more in that moment than if she had pretended not to be afraid. "Then we do it your way," he said. "Nothing happens in this house that you don't agree to." Mason approved the plan with the caution of a man who hated needing it. John checked the front lock, the kitchen windows, the back door, the mudroom latch, the basement bulkhead, and the side path buried in snow. He located the old generator line, tested Mary's flashlight batteries, moved a heavy chair near the hallway but not in front of it, and marked the cleanest exit route if they had to leave quickly. Mason talked him through where to place the small camera Deputy Pike had dropped off outside Calvin's before they returned. One near the front window angled toward the porch, one temporary phone camera facing the kitchen table, and the most important one hidden within the old wall clock Thomas had repaired years earlier. Mary watched John open the clock with careful hands. "Thomas wound that every Sunday," she said. "Then we'll make sure it still keeps time," John replied. He fitted the tiny lens behind a shadowed gap near the face, so the room would look ordinary to anyone who did not know where to look. By morning, the snow had eased enough for tire sounds to reach the house again. Not Ray, not yet. A compact veterinary SUV pulled into the drive with a paw print decal half covered in slush. Nora Field stepped out carrying a brown leather medical bag, her teal winter coat bright against the gray yard. She moved quickly but not carelessly, the way people do when many frightened animals have taught them that sudden kindness can still feel like threat. Mary opened the door before Nora knocked. "I'm sorry to call you into this weather." "You'd scold me if I didn't come," Nora said, and her smile made Mary's shoulders drop a little. Nora was 44, practical-faced and clear-eyed, with chestnut hair tied back and hands that looked capable of both stitching a wound and calming a shaking dog. She greeted Mary first, then crouched sideways several feet from Max rather than reaching for him. "Hello, old man. I hear you made a strong professional decision with somebody's pant leg." Max sniffed the air, recognized no danger, and allowed Nora to examine him near the stove. She checked his gums, joints, heart, paws, and the strain in his rear leg from the night's travel. "He's sore," she said, "overworked and anxious, but not injured from the bite incident." Mary flinched at the word incident. Nora looked up. "Mary, listen to me. A defensive bite to clothing when a person is advancing on the owner is not the same as an unprovoked attack. If Ray files a dangerous dog complaint, we document Max's age, medical history, temperament, and the context. We get statements. We use the porch camera if there is one." Mary's eyes filled again, this time with the specific terror of losing the last living creature that made her house feel inhabited. "Could they take him?" "They can try to scare you with that," Nora said. "Trying is not the same as succeeding." John, standing near the sink, saw Mary absorb that distinction like warmth. Nora noticed him only after Max's examination was done. Or rather, John realized she had been noticing him all along without staring. Max limped to him, slow and deliberate, and placed his silver muzzle against the back of John's hand. John's arm stiffened before he could stop it. Nora's expression changed, not with curiosity exactly, but recognition. People who worked with animals learned to read the movement before the story. "You had one once," she said quietly. John drew his hand back too fast. "I've had dogs around. That isn't what I said." Mary, sitting beside Max, looked from Nora to John and saw a door close across his face. Nora did not push. She packed her stethoscope, left medication for Max's joints, and wrote a note stating that Max showed no signs of dangerous aggression and that his behavior was consistent with defense of his owner under distress. Before leaving, she gave John a small packet of dog treats. "Don't hand it to him. Let him decide when to come to you." John almost gave it back. Then he put it in his jacket pocket. The day passed in fragments. Mason called twice. Deputy Aaron Pike sent copies of preliminary notes and confirmed that the Hawthorne contract had been filed under a company less than 8 months old, not directly under Ray Voss's name. By late afternoon, Mason had found more. The subcontract paperwork linked to a shell company that had done winter hazard assessments near 2 properties later purchased by brokers tied to Renshaw Development. One signature belonged to an assistant in Clive Renshaw's office, not enough to prove the top man ordered anything, but enough to explain why Ray would be desperate. "Somebody above him is leaning hard," Mason said over the phone. "There's a land meeting Monday morning. If that notebook gets out before then, Ray becomes the disposable man. He'll want it back before anyone else knows what's in it." John looked toward Mary, asleep at last in the front room chair beside the fire Max stretched at her feet. "Then he comes tonight or tomorrow, most likely, and if he doesn't, then we build the case slower, but keep recording. If he calls, speaker, let him talk. Don't threaten him. Don't promise him anything. Make him repeat himself." Evening settled early. Mary refused to sleep in the rear bedroom, so John helped move blankets to the front room. She protested that he did not need to carry the old quilt folded on the trunk, then immediately told him which quilt Thomas had liked best. The contradiction made them both almost smile. By 9, Mary's exhaustion overcame her fear. She slept upright in the armchair, one hand hanging low enough for Max to rest his head beneath it. John sat in the kitchen with the lights off, the clock camera active, listening to the house, not just the wind. Houses had sounds the way people had breathing. The tarp snapped, the pipes ticked, the roof shifted, but did not crack. Outside, snow moved against the foundation in soft sighs. Inside, the old wall clock counted seconds Thomas had once wound by hand. John stepped onto the front porch for air. Cold struck his face cleanly. He welcomed it. Warmth made memories loosen. He had the packet of treats in one pocket, and in the other, a worn metal tag he had carried for years. He took it out before he could decide not to. Ranger was stamped into the dull surface, the letters scratched but legible. Max had followed him, of course. The old dog came through the doorway Mary had left unlatched for him and lowered himself beside John with a stiff grunt. For a while, neither moved. "You shouldn't be out here," John said. Max blinked into the snow. John turned the tag between his fingers. He was smarter than most men I knew. Ranger. Military working dog. He could find wire under dust, explosives under trash, fear under jokes. His throat tightened, surprising him with its violence. We were building a temporary bridge for civilians to get out. Blast hit after the second convoy. They told me it wasn't my fault, that the charge was buried deep, that he saved lives before it took him. He closed his fist around the tag. Doesn't matter what they told me. Max shifted closer until his shoulder touched John's boot. The dog did not offer forgiveness. That would have been too human and too cheap. He simply stayed. Then he laid his muzzle on John's knee with the weary confidence of an animal that had chosen a place and expected the world to respect it. John's hand hovered above the silvered head. When he finally touched Max, it was barely a stroke, more an apology than affection. "I don't stay," he whispered. "That's the rule." Max breathed out, warm against his leg, and did not move. The phone rang inside. John was up before the second ring. Mary startled awake, reaching for Max, but the old dog was already following John back in. The wall phone rang again, sharp and ugly in the dim room. Mary's face went white when she saw the number blocked on the tiny display. John did not touch the receiver. He pointed to the speaker button, then to the phone camera Mason had set facing the table. Mary swallowed. Her hands shook so badly she had to use both to press the button. "Hello?" For a second there was only static. Then Ray Voss's voice came through, stripped of every trace of contractor politeness. "You've got something that belongs to my company." Mary closed her eyes. John stood beside the table, silent. Ray continued. "And you've got a violent homeless vet in your house. That's not a good look for a woman trying to prove she can live alone." Mary's mouth trembled. She looked at Max, then at the clock Thomas had wounded for decades. "I don't know what you mean, Mr. Voss. Don't play dumb with me. The book. You give it back. This stays simple. You don't. I file on the dog. I file on Mercer. And I make sure the county sees that roof before sunrise." Mary's finger hovered near the button to end the call. John thought she would press it. Instead, she drew a breath that shook all the way down and said, "Are you threatening to take my dog because I did not sign your contract?" Ray snapped. "I'm telling you consequences come to stubborn old women who let strays speak for them." Mary flinched, but she kept him talking. "And the notebook? That is Hawthorne property. The one with my name in it." A pause. "Too long. Lady, you are in over your head. Then perhaps you should explain it clearly." Ray's breathing grew heavier. "Midnight tomorrow. You put it in your mailbox. No cops. No church people. No Mercer. Or I come get it myself." The line went dead. For several seconds the house seemed to listen after him. Then John moved. He saved the recording, checked the camera, texted Mason the file, and turned off the front room lamp. Mary sat very still beside Max. Her face was pale, but something in her posture had changed. Fear had not left. It had been joined by purpose. John checked the clock camera once more. The tiny lens hidden in Thomas's old work. Outside, beyond the dark windows and the braced roof, Ray Voss was no longer simply angry. He was coming back because the men who had hired him had made him afraid too. John understood men like that. Afraid predators became reckless. He looked at Mary, at Max, at the house that had begun as someone else's trouble and now held the weight of many names. Then he reached for the light switch and left the room dim, ready to record whatever came next. The second storm arrived like something with a grudge. By late evening, the snow had stopped falling gently and begun striking the house sideways, driven by wind hard enough to make the old walls answer. The tarp John had tied over the rear roof snapped and bellied against the ropes, rising and falling like a sail on a dark sea. Every few minutes, a gust forced itself beneath the eaves and made the boards groan. Mary sat in the front room with Max beside her chair, one hand resting on the old dog's head, the other folded around the edge of her cardigan. The house had been made ready as carefully as John and Mason could manage, but readiness did not feel like safety. It felt like waiting for a fist to hit a door. John moved through the dim rooms one more time. He checked the front lock, the side latch, the mudroom door, the phone camera facing the kitchen table, the tiny lens hidden in Thomas Whitaker's old wall clock, and the battery pack Mason had told him to tape beneath the narrow shelf. He had learned a long time ago that plans rarely survived weather, fear, and desperate men at the same time. Mason and a small state investigative team were positioned beyond the church road, But Old Briar was filling fast. Deputy Aaron Pike waited near the turnoff by the church to block any vehicle that tried to flee downhill. Nora Fields was at her clinic with the lights on and a treatment table ready for Max if the night went badly. Everyone had a role. Everyone had a limitation. The storm cared nothing for either. Mary watched John return to the front room. "Are they close?" she asked. "Close enough to hear if the call stays connected," John said. "Not close enough for me to like it." The phone lay on the side table, open to Mason's line. Reception came and went in thin, unreliable bars. Mason's voice had cut out twice already, returning each time with the same instruction. "Keep them talking. Do not open the door unless necessary. Do not strike first. Document everything." John understood the logic. He also understood the weight of standing in a house with an old woman and an old dog while men outside decided how far they were willing to go. Max lifted his head before anyone heard the engines. At first it was only a change in the dog's breathing. Then his ears shifted, then a low growl moved through him, deep and tired but unmistakable. John stepped to the window and parted the curtain with 2 fingers. Headlights appeared at the bend in Old Briar, first one pair, then another. They came slowly through the white darkness, swelling and fading as snow crossed their beams. 2 vehicles, work trucks larger than Ray's first one, pushing through drifts until they stopped in front of Mary's house. Their lights stayed on, aimed straight at the windows. Mary's fingers tightened in Max's fur. "Remember," John said quietly, "you don't have to prove courage, you only have to tell the truth." She nodded, though her face had gone pale. The pounding came before the engines shut off. Ray Voss did not knock like a man requesting entry. He hit the door with the side of his fist. "Mrs. Whitaker, open up. Emergency inspection." John stayed out of direct view, standing near the hallway where he could see the door and the clock camera could see the room. Mary rose slowly. Max tried to rise with her, but she pressed him gently down. "Stay, sweetheart," she whispered, though everyone in the room knew he would not if danger entered. Mary did not open the door fully. She left the chain on and spoke through the gap. "It is nearly midnight, Mr. Voss." Ray stood on the porch in his yellow-brown work coat, snow clinging to his shoulders, his face redder than before. Behind him stood 4 men. One wore a long dark overcoat and leather gloves, carrying a folder under one arm with the stiff importance of someone paid to sound official. Another, older and narrow-faced, had a county inspection badge clipped crookedly to his coat. The remaining 2 had the blank, heavy posture of men used to moving things other people did not want moved. Ray held up a paper sealed in a plastic sleeve. "This structure has been flagged as unsafe. You need to vacate immediately for your own protection." John stepped forward just enough for Ray to see him. "By what authority?" Ray's mouth twisted. "You again. By what authority?" John repeated. The man in the overcoat answered, voice smooth and bloodless. "Hawthorne Roofing has filed an emergency hazard notice based on observed structural compromise. Mrs. Whitaker's refusal to authorize stabilization work creates a liability concern." "That wasn't an answer," John said. "What agency issued removal authority? Name, office, signature, time filed." The narrow-faced inspector shifted in the cold. "Sir, this is a safety matter. Interference may be reported." "Report it," John said. "On camera." Ray's eyes flicked, just for a second, toward the rooms behind John. That flick told John enough. Ray knew there might be cameras. He did not know where. Mary opened the door no farther. "Mr. Voss, why are you here?" "I told you," Ray snapped. "Your roof is dangerous. Then why did you call about a notebook?" Ray's jaw tightened. The phone on the table crackled softly. Mason was still listening. Mary's voice shook, but she held it steady enough. "You said it belonged to your company." The overcoat man leaned toward Ray, whispering something John could not catch. Ray ignored him. "Because it is company property, a customer log. You have no right to keep it." "A customer log," Mary repeated. "Then why is my dog written in it? Why does it say I sleep in the rear bedroom? Why does it say to push before the next storm?" Ray's polished anger began to split. "You don't know what you're reading. Then explain it." For a moment, the only sound was the storm dragging its nails along the siding. Ray lowered his voice. "Lady, you are standing in the way of things bigger than your little house. People have plans for this town, good plans, jobs, roads, money. The Northland is going to change whether you like it or not." "The Northland," Mary said. "You mean where Eleanor lives?" Where Calvin lives. You old folks always think every rotten porch is a cathedral. Ray stepped closer to the crack in the door. If people knew what was good for them, they'd sign, take the relocation money, and let men with vision do something useful before spring. John saw Mary flinch at old folks, but she did not retreat.
Useful for whom?
Ray's eyes hardened. Give me the book. Behind the house, Max suddenly barked. It was not the bark he had given Ray the first day. This one was sharper, urgent, aimed at the rear of the house. John turned as the old dog forced himself to his feet and limped toward the kitchen. A metallic scrape came from the mudroom side. Someone had gone around back. John moved fast, not toward Ray, but toward the sound. Max reached the back door first, barking until his voice cracked. Through the small window, John saw a man crouched near the generator line, one gloved hand pulling at the cable, the other reaching toward the little exterior camera Mason had placed under the eave. John shoved the door open before the man could cut the line. They collided on the icy step. The man swung a tool. John caught his forearm, drove him sideways into the railing, and slipped on the frozen edge hard enough that pain shot through his hip. The man tried to wrench free. John hooked a boot behind his ankle and put him down in the snow, pinning him with one knee long enough to tear the tool from his hand. "Stay down," John growled. A crash came from the front room. Ray had forced the chain door hard enough to break the old frame. The chain tore loose, screws scattering across the floor. Mary stumbled backward. Max spun toward the sound and tried to charge back, but his legs nearly failed beneath him. John left the man in the snow and ran through the kitchen. Ray was inside now, wet boots on Thomas's floor, one hand locked around Mary's wrist. The overcoat man shouted about liability, the inspector shouted about lawful access, and the two heavy men moved through the doorway behind them. Ray shoved a paper onto the side table. "Sign it. Voluntary relocation due to hazardous conditions. You sign, I take the book, and your dog doesn't become a county problem." Mary's face was white with pain where he gripped her, but her eyes went to the clock on the wall. Thomas's clock, the camera. John stopped 3 steps away. Every instinct in him wanted to tear Ray off her. Every lesson Mason had drilled into him said, "Make the record clear. Let go of her." Ray laughed once. "Or what, you'll assault another worker? A homeless vet with a violent dog and an old woman who can't manage her own roof? You think anybody takes your word over paperwork?" Mary straightened. The movement was small, but it changed the room. She was still frightened. Her hand still trembled. But when she spoke, she did not sound like a woman begging to be left alone. She sounded like a teacher calling names from a roll book. "Eleanor Briggs," she said. Ray blinked. Calvin Rhodes, Hattie Doyle, Leonard Marsh, Ruth Bellamy. Mary lifted her chin, tears standing in her eyes but not falling. "Why were their names in your book, Mr. Voss? Why are they all old? Why are they all alone? Why are their houses on land Mr. Renshaw wants before spring?" The inspector's face drained. Ray's grip tightened. "Shut up. Why did Eleanor's heat fail after your men left?" Mary continued. "Why was Calvin's shed cut? Why was my roof damaged before you asked me for $10,000? Ray lost the last of his control. "Because you people don't move until somebody makes you," he shouted. "You sit in rotting houses on valuable land and call it memory. You're obstacles, that's all. Obstacles on parcels men with money can actually use." The clock recorded every word. Ray realized it the instant he saw John's eyes shift toward the wall. He followed the look, saw the clock and lunged. John met him halfway. Ray swung his shoulder into him, reaching for the clock with one hand and the hammer on his belt with the other. John drove him back into the table, knocking the relocation paper to the floor. One of the heavy men came at John from the side. John did not punch him. He stepped inside the man's reach, turned the wrist holding a pry bar, and used the man's forward weight to send him into the armchair. The second man grabbed John's jacket from behind. John dropped his center of gravity, twisted, and slammed an elbow back just enough to break the grip without breaking bone. Max put himself in front of Mary. He could barely stand now. His rear leg shook violently, and his breath came harsh. But he planted himself between her and Ray as Ray staggered free, hammer in hand again. "Move that dog," Ray snarled. Mary cried, "Max, no!" Ray raised the hammer. John crossed the room in 2 strides. There was no more waiting for statements, no more asking for names. The threat was clear, the record already made. He caught Ray's hammer arm, drove his forearm across Ray's chest, and put him down hard on the floorboards Thomas had laid decades earlier. Ray fought beneath him, cursing, but John locked the wrist, pinned the shoulder, and held him there with a control that was colder than rage. Outside, sirens rose through the storm. Headlights flooded the windows, white, blue, red, scattering through the snow until the whole room flashed with fractured light. Mason Greer came through the broken doorway first, parka dusted in snow, badge visible, weapon low but ready. Behind him came 2 state officers. Deputy Aaron Pike appeared at the rear entrance, dragging the man from the generator line with his hands cuffed behind him. "State investigation," Mason shouted. "Hands visible, down now." The overcoat man tried to pull out his phone. "I need to contact Mr. Renshaw." A state officer took the phone before he finished the sentence. The inspector stood frozen, mouth open, badge suddenly useless on his coat. One by one, the men who had filled Mary's house with threats were forced to the floor, cuffed, searched, and read their rights over the sound of the storm. Ray kept shouting until Mason crouched near him and said, "We have the call, the notebook, the cameras, the forced entry, the attempted utility sabotage, and your statement about the Northland. Keep talking if you'd like." Ray stopped. For one breath, the house seemed to understand it had survived. Then Max collapsed. He folded slowly at first, as if trying to lie down with dignity. Then his legs gave way completely beside the hearth. Mary made a sound John would never forget. Not a scream exactly, a breaking. She fell to her knees next to him, both hands on his neck. "Max. Max, sweetheart, look at me." John released Ray fully to Mason and crossed the room. Max's eyes were open, fixed on Mary, his breathing fast and shallow. The old dog's silver muzzle rested against the rug, but his gaze still searched her face, as if his last duty was to confirm she was unharmed. "Nora," John said. Mason was already moving. "Clinic's ready. My vehicle." John wrapped Max in the quilt from Mary's chair, lifting him with more care than he had used for anything in years. The dog felt too heavy and too fragile at once. Mary climbed into the back of Mason's SUV with Max's head in her lap, whispering his name over and over. John got in beside them, holding the blanket tight around the old dog's body as the vehicle lurched into the storm. Behind them, Ray Voss stood cuffed in the house he had tried to take, surrounded by the evidence of his own words. Ahead, through the white road and the flashing sweep of wipers, waited the glow of Nora Fields' clinic. John bent close to Max, one hand pressed against the old dog's chest, feeling each strained breath. "Stay with me," he whispered, the words tearing loose from a place he had sealed years ago. "Please, boy, stay with me." The sirens faded behind them, the storm swallowed the road, and though Ray had been caught, John knew the only battle that mattered now was whether the dog who had guarded Mary's home would live to see one more morning under its roof. Morning came to Milford Hollow without victory music. It arrived pale and tired, pushing a thin gray light across the snowdrifts, the broken plow ridges, the black pine branches, and the roofs that had survived the night by luck, workmanship, or prayer. The storm had moved east before dawn, leaving behind a silence so wide that even the town's church bell seemed to ring softly when Pastor Crane tested it at 9. On Old Briar Road, Mary Whitaker's porch still bore the scars of the night before. Splintered wood near the broken chain, muddy boot prints frozen into the floorboards, a torn strip of yellow caution paper Ray Voss had dropped in the snow. Inside, Thomas's old wall clock still ticked, its face slightly crooked from where Ray had lunged toward it, but it had done what no one in that house had expected a clock to do. It had kept time, and it had kept truth. By breakfast, word had spread faster than snowmelt. Hawthorne Roofing had not simply overcharged an elderly widow. That was how the rumor began, because towns often needed simple versions before they could bear complicated ones. Then the details came: a notebook, a forged emergency notice, a county inspector in cuffs, a forced entry, a contractor shouting about old people standing in the way of valuable land. By noon, Mason Greer and Deputy Aaron Pike had already begun stitching the fragments into something prosecutors could use. Ray Voss had given them the notebook by losing it, the phone call by making it, the forced entry by breaking the door, and the confession by mistaking Mary's fear for weakness. The state investigators took statements from Eleanor Briggs and Calvin Rhodes. Aaron quietly pulled older reports that had been dismissed as civil disputes. Mason followed the paperwork from Hawthorne Roofing to a shell company, barely 8 months old. Then from that shell company to subcontract authorizations signed by an assistant connected to Renshaw Development Group. Clive Renshaw's name was not yet on an arrest form, but it was no longer floating above the dirt like a respectable businessman's name in a newspaper article. It had begun to sink. None of that mattered to Mary when the first local reporter found Nora Fields's veterinary clinic. Mary sat inside the treatment room with her coat still on, both hands wrapped around Max's front paw. The old dog lay on a padded table beneath a wool blanket, his silver muzzle turned toward her, his breathing steadier than it had been in Mason's SUV, but still too shallow for comfort. Nora moved around him with quiet precision, checking his heart, his gums, the stiffness in his rear leg, the strain that fear and age had pulled through his body. Her teal coat hung over the back of a chair now, her sleeves were rolled, and her face carried the calm seriousness that made panic feel wasteful. John stood in the hallway because the room was small and because he did not know what to do with his hands. "He's through the worst of it," Nora said at last. Mary closed her eyes. "But he is old," Nora continued gently. "His heart is tired, his joints are inflamed. He needs warmth, rest, medication, and no more heroic decisions for a while." Mary gave a broken little laugh that turned into a sob before it reached the end. "I've been telling him that for years." Max's tail moved once beneath the blanket, barely more than a thought. Mary bent over him, pressing her forehead into the fur between his ears. "You foolish, wonderful old boy," she whispered. "You didn't have to carry the whole house." John looked through the glass panel in the door and felt something in his chest loosen and hurt at the same time. He had seen animals survive the night before. He had also seen them not survive it. The body learned to stand still either way, because there were always other tasks, other people watching, other reasons not to fall apart. But seeing Max blink slowly under Mary's hand, alive because he had spent himself protecting her, made John think of Ranger with a clarity he had avoided for years. Not the blast, not the smoke, not the tag in his palm, the moment before it. Ranger pressing forward because that was what loyalty did. It did not calculate odds. It did not wait for comfort. It stayed where love had placed it. Mason came to stand beside him, snow melting from the hem of his dark parka. He looked older in daylight, the lines near his eyes deeper, the small scar by his brow standing pale against tired skin. "You did right last night," he said. John kept his eyes on Max. "Mary did right. She did. So did you." John shook his head, not in denial exactly, but refusal. Praise always felt like a coat cut for someone else. "If you'd been 5 minutes later. If we'd gone in 5 minutes earlier, half of it becomes argument over a property dispute and an angry veteran in the room," Mason said. "Ugly truth, but truth. We got them because you waited until waiting would hurt someone." John did not answer. He watched Mary stroke Max's paw. "I almost didn't," he said. Mason's voice softened. "I know." A reporter knocked on the clinic door. Nora stepped out before anyone else could respond and handled the man with such clean firmness that even Mason looked impressed. "No interviews here," she said. "There is an elderly woman and an elderly dog inside. You can respect that, or you can explain on camera why you could not." The reporter retreated to the parking lot, where 2 more had gathered near the plowed edge. Outside, the story was becoming public. Inside, Mary only cared that Max's breathing had steadied. The following days did not turn into celebration. They turned into work. That, John thought, was usually how real survival looked. Mason stayed in town long enough to coordinate state interviews. Aaron Pike, no longer speaking through the cautious filter of a deputy, trying not to anger his supervisor, began calling every older resident whose name appeared in Ray's notebook. Pastor Willard Crane opened the fellowship hall for coffee, soup, and paperwork help. Eleanor Briggs arrived the second day with a covered pot of chicken soup, despite John telling her she should be resting. She wore a pale blue sweater and her little music note necklace, and when Mary scolded her, Eleanor said, "I have been saved from freezing. Let me bring soup with dignity." Calvin Rhodes came with a toolbox so old it looked like it had outlived 3 trucks and 1 marriage. He said he was there because Mary's porch rail was a disgrace and because he did not trust church volunteers with a level. By noon, He and John were arguing peacefully over the best way to brace the rear slope until proper materials arrived. A licensed carpenter from town, a quiet man named Ben Harlan, whom Pastor Crane had known for years, inspected the roof and confirmed what John already believed. The temporary work had held, but the damaged section needed real replacement. Ben did not ask for a deposit. He did not bring red-letter warnings. He brought a clipboard, references, a license number Mary could verify, and a thermos his wife had filled with coffee. Together, over the next several days, they repaired the house properly. They removed the shingles Ray's crew had pried loose, replaced the cut underlayment, sistered the weakened support, straightened the gutter, sealed the chimney flashing, and added a stronger handrail to the porch steps. John did not do it alone, and that mattered. No miracle repair in the middle of a whiteout. No lone hero conquering winter with a hammer. The roof became sound because a group of people showed up after the danger passed and kept showing up when no camera was pointed at them. Each strike of the hammer sounded different from Ray's. Ray's hammer had been threat. This hammering became answer. From that work grew something Mary named almost by accident. Pastor Crane had a list of older residents who needed check-ins before storms. Nora knew which ones had animals that might keep them from leaving in emergencies. Aaron knew how many calls had been dismissed because people had been too embarrassed to insist. Eleanor suggested a phone tree. Calvin suggested a list of crooks, fools, and real tradesmen, which Mary edited into verified services before anyone could print it. By the end of the week, a handwritten sign appeared on the church bulletin board. Warm Roof Circle, winter check-ins, repair referrals, fraud reports, rides to appointments, no one signs alone. Mary stood in front of the sign for a long time. "I don't want anyone to feel the way I felt on that porch," she said. John, standing beside her with a box of donated flashlights, nodded. He did not have to ask which porch. Everyone in town would know soon enough. Ray remained in custody. The bribed inspector had begun talking. The overcoat man's phone had given Mason more names than anyone expected. Clive Renshaw gave a statement through an attorney, full of polished distance and phrases like independent subcontractor and no direct operational knowledge. Mason did not smile when he read it. "People like Renshaw don't fall fast," he told John, "but they fall harder when the paper trail starts under their own shoes." The investigation would continue beyond Mary's house, beyond Old Briar, beyond the neat ending any newspaper wanted. That was all right. Some justice arrived in cuffs. Some arrived as a file that grew too heavy to ignore. On the 5th evening after the storm, John finished tightening the last screw on Mary's new porch rail. Max lay inside by the fire, alive and deeply offended by the cone Nora had briefly threatened but not used. Mary came to the doorway holding a small wooden box. John recognized it from the shelf near Thomas's photograph. She carried it with both hands. "John," she said, and the way she said his name made him stand as if called to attention. Inside the box was a medal, old and carefully kept, the ribbon faded but clean. "Thomas kept this from his Navy years," Mary said. "He never wore it, said medals belong to moments, not men. But he took it out every Memorial Day and told Max not to chew the ribbon." Her smile trembled. "I want you to have it." John stared at the medal. He understood at once that it was not payment. Mary would have been insulted if he treated it that way. It was gratitude made into an object. Memory placed into his hands. He lifted it carefully, feeling the surprising weight of it. For a moment he imagined accepting. Imagined driving away with Thomas Whitaker's medal in the glove box beside Ranger's tag, another proof that someone had briefly trusted him with something precious. Then he looked at the house. The rail Thomas had built and John had repaired, the roof no longer leaking, the warm square of light falling across Mary's shoulder. He put the medal back in the box. Mary's face fell a little before she could hide it. John closed the lid gently. "If Thomas built this house with you, then that belongs under this roof." Mary looked down at the box. "Then how am I supposed to thank you? You don't owe me anything." She studied him in the porch light. Behind him, his truck sat near the drive, tarp tied over the bed, old sleeping bag visible through the rear window because he had forgotten to hide it. Mary saw it. John knew she saw it. She did not pity him, and that was why he did not look away. Pity had a way of making a man smaller. Mary's gaze did not do that. It simply made room for what was true. The roof still needs watching through the thaw, she said. Max needs someone patient enough to walk slowly in the mornings. Calvin will ruin my porch if no one argues with him properly. And I have too much soup for one person. She opened the door wider. If you have nowhere you must be, stay through the winter. John could have said no quickly. He had survived for years by saying no before kindness found its footing. No to spare rooms, no to holiday dinners, no to dogs that leaned against his knee. But Max lifted his head from the rug, tail brushing once against the floor, and Mary turned toward the kitchen, as if she had not just handed him a choice that frightened him more than Ray ever had. That night, snow fell again, but softly this time. Not enough to threaten the roof, just enough to cover the scars in the yard. A few reporters still waited beyond the road, hoping for a photograph of the veteran who had exposed the crew preying on the elderly. Inside, no one used the word hero. John sat on the floor beside Max, moving his hand slowly over the old dog's head the way Nora had told him to, letting Max decide the closeness. Mary stood at the stove, stirring soup in the blue enamel pot Thomas had bought at a flea market 30 years earlier. "John," she called, as naturally as if she had been saying it for years. "Supper's getting cold." The words landed harder than praise, harder than thanks, harder than any medal. John bowed his head, eyes burning before he could stop them. He had slept under open skies, in truck cabs, in rooms where he kept his boots facing the door. He had repaired houses and left before the smell of dinner could become memory. He had told himself belonging was a thing other people risked because they had not learned how quickly it could be taken. Max placed his muzzle on John's knee. Mary set a bowl at the table and pulled out the empty chair. Outside, winter pressed its face against the windows and found no way in. The roof held, the fire burned, the clock ticked with Thomas's old patience, and John Mercer, who had spent years walking past warm windows because he believed none of them were meant for him, rose slowly from the floor and took his place at the table. Sometimes healing does not arrive like a grand miracle. Sometimes it comes as a repaired roof, an old dog still breathing beside the fire, and a warm bowl of soup placed at a table where someone finally says, "You belong here. Marry Max." And John remind us that no one should have to face fear alone, especially those who have already given so much and asked for so little. A small act of courage, a loyal heart, and one open door can become the beginning of a new family. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us who you are grateful for today, and if you believe stories like this still matter, please subscribe and stay with us for the next one. May your home be warm, your heart be steady, and may God place the right people beside you when the storm feels too heavy to face alone.